the Batman, AireCon, and Switch and Signal. This is Staying In.
I've actually been thinking about this all week, and I feel like this is one of those philosophical questions that is a bit like the ship of Theseus, or the trolley problem.
Trigger's broom.
Yeah, anything along those lines, right?
What's more important to a sandwich, the bread or the filling?
So
those
it's
kind of
okay.
things.
So it's kind of close to that, Sam. I'll be honest with you. So, do you eat soup, or do you drink soup?
Eat it. Correct answer. Move on.
I was about to say a week on this.
You spent a week on.
I've put a full week into this.
Okay. Just to play in this space a little bit. Let's say, Sam, what element of soup are you determining that you're eating it in? What makes it eating? So if you were to compare it to orange juice, you drink orange juice, which is juice squeezed from a fruit.
Yep.
And potentially you could have a tomato soup, which is juice and a bit of the pulp from a tomato.
Mm-hmm.
So why are you eating one and drinking other? By the way, you're right. I'm just trying to play in the space.
Because a soup is cooked, ingredients list, what it's served in, and how you drink it.
So
let's move on.
So gazpacho soup is cold.
Is cooked and then it's cooled.
Yeah.
It's cooked and then it's cooled.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Go on.
But it's still a liquid.
I know.
Okay, what about hot chocolate? Hot chocolate where you blend ingredients, you heat it, but you drink it.
But it's a
Cup
dessert.
of tea, you're blending ingredients, you're heating it, but you're drinking it.
You're not blending ingredients. It's
Yeah,
just
you are.
it's just stuff infused from a bloody leaf.
I don't deconstruct my cup of tea and have the milk separately.
Yeah, and the hot chocolate example is particularly good.
I don't chew on tea bags and then have a drink of water. I blend them all together.
No. But again, okay, so in my list of things, fair enough. Cooked ingredients. Next, what you serve it in.
Mug,
how you consume
bowl.
it. So you don't... Yeah, okay. So some teas are served in bowls. Fair enough.
Do you eat a cup of soup or do you drink a cup of soup?
Eat it. It's a soup.
But it's in a mug.
No, it's not. So Kris and I had a bit of a epic weekend from a Friday night until a Sunday afternoon. We were on it.
Mm-hmm.
Were you painting the town red?
Oh, like you wouldn't believe, Dan. Like you would not believe.
Ripping it up, back in your youth. Bed by 10?
Oh no, well, multiple nights we weren't in bed until at least 1 o'clock in the morning.
What?
Yeah, I know.
What were you doing?
Bonkers. Well, the first night, the Friday, it was our rescheduled trip to go and see the Batman.
We went in your car, didn't we, Sam?
But we went in my car, yeah. Safely and securely, got there on time. And it was like the only showing we could go and see was a late one. So we didn't get out of there until like midnight. But yeah, so it's an all right film, isn't it?
Is that the Sam review? Yeah, it's an alright film.
Oh no, Kris is... Do you want the Sam review?
Just on the Batman, are we going to talk like spoilers, or are we going to just like, or are we not?
Should we do what we did for Spider-Man and do like an overview, how it made us feel?
Yeah.
First, and then we'll do spoilies at the end, which Kris can just tag on, and he doesn't have to worry about cutting anything out because it's at the end of the podcast.
Okay.
No. It's important we keep that soup chat in.
So I think what I can say about it without spoiling it is I think that it's a very good film, but it's too long, way too long. And I think that everything it does that it's brilliant, basically it spends about an hour forgetting what it does that's brilliant, and then remembers at the end of the film, oh yeah, that's why this film is so brilliant, so let's do that again. and then finish on a high. So for me, it's tonally all over the place. The message that it's trying to say about Batman and actually the story of the film sort of flies all over the place because it forgets itself in the middle hour. But eventually, and looking at it in the whole, I think that the casting is superb, the soundtrack is superb, and the Batman story that I think it's trying to tell is actually quite smart, but I don't think it kind of gets away with it on the whole. But otherwise, I had a good time.
I'd agree with, I think, most of those points. I think by the sounds of it, I enjoyed it more than you did. From like looking at kind of all the other superhero films that I've seen in probably recent years, not just kind of recently now, but it stuck with me for a lot longer, and it left me thinking about it a lot longer than most other films. And that could be because I was kind of questioning it all the way through. It's a very, very different kind of film compared to what we have come to expect of kind of superhero films, whether they be Marvel or whether they be DC or kind of anything around that, both kind of Sony or Marvel or anything like that. So it is very, very different. It's very new, which was great. You can't not compare it to, I'm not going to go into spoiler right now, you can't not compare it to the Christopher Nolan trilogy, and that's such a high bar for any superhero film to meet, and it doesn't try to meet it, and it's obviously looking at a wider trilogy or multiple films to build on. And so I'm very interested to see where it builds, because there are certain things I'm missing from it that I felt left me a little bit cold, that I am happy. When we talked about Eternals, I said at the end of it, I've got no interest in spending any time with these people. With the Batman, I'm really interested to spend more time with these people. I want to see how the story develops, to see if perhaps the things that I'm missing can come in later, and it becomes a much more rounded story. I agree. There's a whole portion that we'll go into afterwards of that just doesn't need to be there, and it does kind of get lost a little bit. But there are so many kind of motifs and themes and tones that are there for most of the film, which are really effective, and the way the visuals are done really creates something of the character that I don't really think has been done before. Like, it was like the fear of the Batman is there much more so than any other kind of Batman film, other than perhaps like the kind of the dockyard scene in Batman Begins. That's the closest I can see. Like, other than that, I've never really felt him being like a really scary person to criminals, whereas in this you absolutely get that, and the visuals back that up completely.
I think Snyder pulled off a pretty scary Batman. I thought Batfleck was pretty intimidating. Just on a point, which I thought was quite interesting, just of something that you just said there, Dan, and just a wider point about movies these days and how they're made in terms of franchising. Like, isn't it a bit of a shame that when we think about films now, it's almost with the caveat, oh, but it'll be better. The sequel will make this first one better. Like, everything is viewed in the sense that a sequel will sort out all the problems with the first one. Like, it's the same with Uncharted. Like, Uncharted's good, pretty average, mediocre film, but the sequel, but don't worry, we'll fix all those things and we'll make it better for the sequel. It's almost like everything has to be franchised out and everything has to be sequelized and serialized, that we are almost, a film just doesn't really feel like it just can stand on its own anymore. Like, those problems that you got with the film, Dan, it shouldn't have to rely on a sequel to fix them. They are just issues.
Well, maybe just to clarify then, because it's not that I wasn't kind of saying that I needed to have those. Maybe I've just misspoke. Kind of going into it, there are certain things that I was looking for that the film consciously doesn't do. And so as a viewer who goes in with a kind of an idea going in, there's an element of letdown from that. However, I'm aware of the business that they will kind of make more. And so I'm hopeful that gets picked up elsewhere. I don't think it's necessarily of a fault of the film, but I've come into it with an idea of what I want to see. And I want to see certain story beats and character beats shown and explained that don't happen. But I also understand that that's not the film's not doing that. It's not a case of it's just forgotten or it's done it in a bad way. It's purposely not doing certain things that, as the story progresses and the characters develop, that can be built into it. And I think it's a logical thing for it to happen after this stage. Having seen this film, it makes sense for it to happen after this stage than it would be kind of... It's not something where it's set up and it ends on a cliffhanger, or it's like your Dune Part 1 where it just doesn't finish the story type thing. You don't have that. It does stand on its own. You could watch this and not have another one, and you wouldn't lose anything necessarily, but having additional films would, I think, round out some of the things that have been put in, and enhance them, as opposed to kind of needing those extra ones in order for them to make work.
I'm going to have to, in some respects, strangely, I'm going to agree with Sam in the sense that I almost don't want there to be a sequel to this film. I want them to do what they do in the graphic novels or the comic books. I want this to be a one-shot and then let another director take a crack at it. So we were encountering the Batman in their second year as in their kind of dual role as a vigilante fighting crime in Gotham. And so they're just on this kind of rocky relationship, given the fact that they're a vigilante with the Gotham Police Department. And as Dan alluded to, they've begun to kind of weaponize the shadows and become, a symbol of fear, a very potent symbol of fear. But they're still a bit green and a little bit fresh faced, so they're not always right. And actually, we see a Batman that fails quite a lot spectacularly. The fight scenes are deliberately not very stylized. This is somebody who's very angry and unrestrained, and they come a cropper as a consequence. And it's at this time where they are helping the police solve a mystery, tracking down a serial killer who leaves riddles with the bodies of their victims. As you're kind of following that mystery, I think it's fair to say, understandably, as you follow through that mystery, you actually follow the Batman through these different stratas of the Gotham society, from those in power on the surface to those who are in power from within the shadows, I suppose, really.
Man in cloak beats up people.
Yeah, and I think I'm always a bit wary about this because it's really, really interesting. I was talking about, the idea that I want just another director to have a crack at it because I really, really enjoyed this. I don't want a trilogy out of this because I'm worried that it'll dilute the quality of this one, really. Everyone has their favourite type of Batman. Mine has always been the detective, in the same way that I could go and read detective comics, I could go and read Batman, I could go and read the Justice League. If I like Batman as part of as a team, the Super Friends, and there's a Batman for me out there. And in the same way that, like, it seems really reductive to kind of pit all the different Batmen against each other. Like, everyone's got their own type of Batman. And what I love about this character is he's been around since 1939. I love the idea that in the future, archaeologists will look back and they won't know if Batman was someone that actually existed, that we've mythologized in the same way that we've done that with Robin Hood. Because if you ask somebody on the street, was Robin Hood a real person? They won't know. And I think we'll get that in the future with the Batman. And instead, they'll look at and what we have here is almost imagine this was a character that existed. And what we have is a bit like with our modern day adaptations of myths. Oh yeah, this is my interpretation of Helen of Troy or whatever. And I like the fact that every version of Batman is just a different telling of that mythos, really. And for me, what drew me to the Batman as the character as a child was the fact that he was just Sherlock Holmes wearing a cape. And he could go places the police couldn't, but at his core, he was a detective. And I love every iteration of the Batman in cinema. But as soon as I heard that this was a detective story, that was always going to be the main hook and drive for me. It's very, if I mention some kind of touchstones, when I was watching this film, it felt like I was watching Fincher's Seven. I got echoes of Chinatown, which has been, kicked around quite a lot on the internet. You don't need to look very far because Matt Reeves is very, very honest in talking about the kind of influences for that. And that's totally my jam, but it might not be for other people's. And it's not me trying to be evasive here, because I think, there's points to be made in terms of being, critical of a film, but that's my type of Batman, really. And it really, really speaks to me. It's very echoic, and I don't think many people have mentioned this enough, of the animated series, where it's stylized without being stylish, where you've just got the single character, the Batman, all in black with just the blue trim and the white of the eyes, and a very, very particular use of colour there, which Dan alluded to there. And I've listened to interviews with Matt Reeves, and I think this is a film I want to listen to the director's commentary for, because the stuff they were doing was just bonkers. If you watch the film, if you look at the corners, all the edges are often quite blurred using these anamorphic lenses. They deliberately chose to use lenses that were pretty much broken, and they were like, are we going to get chucked out because we're breaking all the rules, where we're just going back against everything we've been taught? That they would put like a paper film over the lens and smear silica gel on it, so everything looks grimy and grubby. And that's not necessarily a new thing, but there's a texture to it that you get in those mid-90s, early 2000s films. And a good example for me is that marked difference between watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbit, where everyone got really, they got absolutely besotted with these new red cameras, but it just looked like a big budget TV show, The Hobbit trilogy. And you get a little bit of that with the Marvel stuff, where you can only cut between shots, go, okay, that's on a set, oh, that's on location, that's just a green screen, and it's all one scene. And what I liked about this particular film was this was a Gotham that wasn't somewhere I could encounter necessarily in the real world, but if I looked hard enough, maybe I could find it. Whereas in some Batman films, Gotham City is clearly, oh yeah, that's just Chicago, and there's nothing distinctive to it that is Gotham per se.
It's interesting that what you say about like different interpretations of Batman and the detective stuff, that it being the one that you particularly like. The Batman that I prefer, that I find is the most compelling, is the freak, the psychopath, vengeance, the power fantasy, the vigilante, the man who is right on the edge of sanity and should probably be locked away. In fact, he definitely should be locked away.
So Azrael, basically.
The Batman I like is the Batman that is how the cops see him. He's a freak. Like, he's not. And to me, this movie is all of that. Like, for me, this is the best Batman movie ever made. Like, it hands down. Like, it portrays a character in such a way that I find thrilling in the way that watching police camera action is thrilling. It's the kind of thrilling of, how far is this going to go? Am I going to see someone get killed? Am I actually witnessing a crime here? It's that horrible, almost primal, watching the thing get murked titillation that, as a superhero, I think Batman is one of the few characters that manages to do it and not be super hokey, like not be super like Spawn, like 90s, like late 90s, early noughties Image Comics, kind of like dark and depressed and uncool. Like, instead, like, this is a character that is deeply, deeply troubled, and is not a character that you should want to empathize with, and yet right at the heart you do empathize with them to some degree. Something primal inside you. There were scenes in that movie where I was sat in the cinema and I went, I wish I could beat up baddies. And that, like, genuinely, like, there is a power fantasy element in it where it's like, I wish I could just do the right thing. I wish because I know there's bad things going on. I wish I could just say sod it and have the complete, essentially carte blanche to do whatever I wanted and go and beat the crap out of a load of people who are terrible. Like, and that's a horrible feeling. That's a horrible thing to have to kind of like get excited about. But it does. It's that dark tingling inside of you that makes you go, oh yeah, that power fantasy stuff. So for me, it was the best Batman movie ever.
So the word soup, it comes from the late Latin supper and the Old French for soup, which is a sop or a broth poured on slices of bread. So actually, that's the thing. If you can pour it on slices of bread,
yeah.
But you can pour anything on slices of bread.
Yeah, of course you can. But and I was about to say, whether it's socially acceptable to do that. If I went into a restaurant and said, "Yeah, that creme caramel. Can you have you got a ciabatta I can pour that on?" That would raise an eyebrow, wouldn't it? Really,
Definitely.
I like the fact that in this scenario, Kris is still refusing to eat soup.
Well, it is my Achilles heel, Dan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Soup
My
eats
thought is
Kris.
if you have a sachet of cuppa soup and you have a sachet of hot chocolate, you put them both in a mug, you add boiling
don't
water.
do that, Kris. That sounds awful.
But Sam, you are eating one of them and you're drinking another. But,
I know, but-
the process has been exactly the same.
Yeah, no, but that's the beauty of language, though, Dan, isn't it? The beautiful thing that we use, a very simple measure of syntax that means that when you're speaking to someone, they know exactly what you're doing. Oh, I'm just eating some soup. Oh, brilliant! That sounds like a perfectly normal thing to do out of a mug. Oh, I'm just drinking some hot chocolate. Oh, that sounds perfect. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm eating some hot chocolate. Well, bloody hell! Ring the hospital. We got a mad one here, John. Like it's the wonder. It's the beautiful thing about
But
language.
what's the difference?
And
But
why?
what's the
you know,
difference?
That's the question. That's the point. Why is it that you are eating soup and drinking hot chocolate?
But the difference is there is a difference. The difference is that we have something to compartmentalize and go, this is one thing and this is another thing. Or else, if you start saying, I'm going to drink soup, where do you put it on the menu? Do you put it with the Manhattans and Long Island iced teas? Or do you actually put it on the menu where it belongs? Like you
do
start
you order it from the bar?
Exactly. You start getting into a whole raft of other questions and other horrible things. It's just a lot easier to delineate it into what it is because it's cooked with multiple ingredients. It's savoury. It's served in a bowl and eaten with a spoon.
No, the way that you delineate it is by using its noun. The way that you delineate between two separate objects, Sam, is through nouns. One is chocolate and one is soup. There's no delineation between what the action is that's based on the noun. That is an absolute absurdity. And there's no idea within the English language of well, we need to make sure that language conforms so that cafes can put the thing in the right place. What are you talking about? That's absolute nonsense.
I mean, if I had a penny for every time we've had a conversation like this and Pete looks like he's genuinely about to burst a blood vessel. I think actually a lot of soups nowadays are actually broths, but soup has just become the common parlance, and there's a marked difference, I think, between a soup, which is a lot thicker, it's a little bit more edible, and a broth, which is something you can actually, it's obviously more watery, and you can kind of sip it.
Where do you stand on chunky soups, Pete? What do you do with those? Still a soup, but it's chunky, so you got to eat some of it.
You got to eat. Oh no, that's absolutely fine. You're eating the individual pieces.
Yes, but if someone comes over to you and goes, "Oh, what are you doing there? What are you doing with that? What are you doing with that soup?" Oh, at the moment I'm drinking. At the moment I'm eating. What you doing?
Depends where I'm at. What do you do with Bovril?
I'd throw it away. Right. Here's another question. Okay, you just been doing some exercise, Pete. There you are, naked on your bike.
Yep.
Fair enough. Do what you do.
Live my life.
You come off after a stern 20 minutes. Oh, parched. Oh, get myself a nice drink.
Yeah.
And your partner puts down a nice cold tomato soup in front of you.
Yeah.
There you go. There's your drink.
Yeah.
There's your drink.
Yeah.
Pours it over his head.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No. So okay. So the logical ramification of this is that anything in which you drink is suitable for post-exercise sustenance. So what you're saying is, no. What you're saying here is, your partner comes along and gives you like a pint of milk. Oh, that's totally acceptable as a drink afterwards to be refreshed with. Oh, by the way, you've just finished your exercise. Here's a Manhattan. No, that's not how that works.
I was just putting you in a scenario where you would probably always have a drink. I mean, as myself and Dan, as both parents, this gets even more confusing because milk is considered a food for early children. So, and then it becomes a drink. It goes from a food to a drink. They eat it. Oh, have you had your milk? Have you eaten your milk? And then it becomes a drink as you get older. There's actually a transference of language. Isn't that incredible? So, there you go. Maybe you never made it past that stage, Peter, is what I'm saying.
And then when you get really old, it reverses.
Yeah, it does,
You eat tomato soup, but you drink a Bloody Mary. They're exactly the same. Well, a Virgin
They're
Bloody
not.
Mary is exactly the same. So it's a society
No, it's
thing.
not. It's not because you cook the
basically-
tomatoes.
basically
You
is.
cook the tomato. You cook the tomatoes as a process, a culinary process that goes into making that. When you're making a Bloody
But if
Mary,
you-
you just
you've already-
squeeze in a
no,
mix.
because you've already established that with gazpacho, it counts because you've cooked it and then they've cooled.
Yeah.
So with a Bloody Mary, the tomato juice has been cooked in order to make the
No, it's
tomato
not.
juice, and then it's been cooled.
No, it's not. It's not. You just squeeze tomatoes. How do you make tomato juice?
This is a dead end because what you're suggesting is a drink is something that is not cooked. For it to not be a
I'm
drink, it has to be heated.
No, I'm not.
Well, that's
No, what I said was there is a delineation of why you eat a soup, and it meets one or all of the criteria. I didn't say it had to meet all of the criteria. It meets one or all of them.
Can I tell you a story, an origin story, please, about Mark who had a dream
Yeah.
in 2016
All right.
that became a wonderful reality.
Ah.
And it started off innocently, and their partner was away, and they said, "Oh, we'll just get some friends around. We'll play some games, and we'll kind of put some tables out. Other people, we'll invite some people. We'll get some sponsors." And eventually, this thing grew, and this little board game gathering, as it were. And they were very much inspired by lots of conventions naming their convention after bodies of water. So Gen Con, for example, is named after Lake Geneva, which I didn't know, actually, which I thought was an interesting
I
thing.
didn't know that. I just thought it was generic convention.
So did I, actually, Sam. And nearby was a river, and the river Aire, and that became the prefix for AireCon. And that is how AireCon was discovered, children. Which is, I should say, a gaming convention that takes place in Harrogate every year. It started off in Bradford, I think, and moved out to Harrogate, an incredible town which I'd never been to before,
Oh, amazing.
nestled in the heartlands of the north. One of the most beautiful drives ever, particularly because we didn't break down, but also the view was wonderful. And this was my first board gaming convention. I was denied it last year because my brother had the cheek, the gall to get married, and I had to turn up as best man. And you all went off to the UK Board Games Expo and yada yada yada. And I tried not to be bitter, but you did go and buy me some games, and I love you very much for it. And one of which I haven't yet played because it's a free player game minimum. And I keep
also
saying,
be cursed.
and it might also be cursed. And so, but aside from that, so we went to AireCon, Sam, and it was your first time as well. I knew nothing about this convention before I went at all. I literally thought it'd be a village hall with some trestle tables, and there'll be like some of those old benches and chairs piled up in the corner, and people have to go and get their chair and bring
Weak
it out.
orange
That's what I
squash.
was imagining. Yep, that's completely it. And the smell of hot dust off the radiators.
yeah.
That's what I was imagining. AireCon was totally not that.
No, and like considering that we'd gone to bed at like 1 o'clock in the morning the previous night after seeing the Batman, and then we got up pretty nice and early, cooked us some sausage bap each, walked the dog. We got in the car and we drove, and so I didn't really know what to expect from AireCon either, really, because we've been to the UK Board Games Expo last year, but even that is not really a fair reflection of. I always knew in the back of my mind that wasn't a fair reflection of what conventions are really like, because that was a much more streamlined affair than it has been in the past, because we were still dealing with some of the sort of ramifications from COVID. So that was sort of very slimmed down there. But I have to say that if you gave me the choice of which one to go to next year and I could make only one date, I would now choose AireCon over the UK Board Games Expo. And I think there's one reason for this, and I just think like how it just all is laid out. First of all, it's in lovely, lovely Harrogate. So me and Kris stayed at a lovely travel lodge just down the road. We have lovely walk-in across parks and in front of cafes and lovely flowers. And, you know, it's very different to crossing that bloody A road that went to the airport at Birmingham Exhibition Centre every morning when we were at the UK Games Expo. And the same in the evening, you know, because it's the Harrogate Convention Centre is right in the centre of Harrogate. We just had our choice of places to go to drink, go to eat, you know, carry on socialising. Whereas in Birmingham, at the expo centre there, I think we all felt very hamstrung in terms of, well, what do we do once we finished, playing board games? Whereas here it's like, right, the convention centre's open until 1:30. You can come back anytime, go off and do your thing, and come back and play some games whenever you want. So there's a lovely Timothy Taylor pub down the road from the convention centre, Pete, which was, oh my god, it was so
Oh my god!
lovely.
Did you drink Landlord?
No, I didn't drink Landlord. I went with one that I'd never heard of before because I thought I'd always had Landlord, so I'll go with something I'd never heard of before. And the convention centre is actually opposite a small brewery pub as well, I think. What? Small batch brewery pub. Yeah, it is, yeah. So that's one of the reasons I think it's great. And also, the layout, once you get inside the convention centre, is really great because unlike the UK Board Games Expo, and again, I don't want to talk about that in terms of disparaging one to lift the other one up. I think they're two very different experiences. Like, whereas the UK Games Expo feels like a glorified shopping experience, this one felt a lot more like, yeah, there are places that you can go and buy games, but let's play them. Let's just get together and play them together. And everywhere you walk, there's little spots, there's these little hot spots of people just getting together and playing games. And the amount of times me and Kris would actually just go for a wander and just stop and look and watch people playing, like, oh, I've heard of that one. Oh, but I've never seen it out of the box. I've never seen it. But yeah, I've heard of it. Oh, that one looks really interesting. And, the amount of games that we saw that we'd only seen through videos or on shelves in shrink wrap that were actually there in front of us being played on tables was just mesmerizing. And, at the UK Board Games Expo, everyone's playing games, but in this massive warehouse space, like this, like 2 halls of the exhibition centre. And the only reason you'd pass someone or pass a table is to go and get some food or go to the loo or leave. Whereas here, it's just like it felt so much more organic, actually encountering people playing games and actually coming across people. And of course, it's a lot smaller, so it feels a lot more compact. And it feels trite to say it, but it was, Kris, wasn't it? One of just going around and like feeling the energy and the enthusiasm for people just playing games throughout the whole weekend was electric.
Yeah, and everyone was really, really super polite and really nice. Mm-hmm. People from all backgrounds, families there, new gamers, with their copies of Carcassonne under their arm, say, for example, seasoned hobbyists. Like when I arrived there, Sam and our friend Adamski, who literally bumped into in the queue to get in, he tapped me on the shoulder and I was like, oh my word, yeah, wow, brilliant. Oh, it's great to see you here. I've never actually met you in person before. This is brilliant. And you and he went off to the Bring and Buy sale, and I went for a walk just around. And what I love about this, which I didn't really appreciate, it is that you can just go to this convention by yourself with nothing. Mm-hmm. You can literally walk in, well, obviously pay to get a ticket and stuff. You can walk in, and I just went for a wander around, and I felt a little bit on edge, thinking, oh gosh, what do I do? Because Sam's not here, and he's been to one of these. What do I do? And I saw these 2 people playing. They were setting up a game of Fort, and they had like a little flag, because you can get these little flags there that say players needed. And I thought, okay, I'll sit with these guys and say, I said, do you want me to teach you it? And they said, oh yeah. If you could teach, that'd be great. So I taught them Fort. And as I was chatting to them, they were telling me that they come every year. They stay at the same table. And what they do is, between them, in the year between coming here, they think about the games they want to play. They make a list. Mm. They come to the convention. All they do is play the games they wanted to play the whole year. And they were a lovely bunch. And every time we would walk through the convention centre, they were there in the same place with different people playing different games. And it's just wonderful. And you really got a sense, and again, this is my first convention. I don't know if it's the same UK Board Game Expo. You get a sense, these people come here every year. They all know each other. And it's not too big, it's not too small, but it felt really, really communal and very, very welcoming. And it's a hobby that often can be dismissed as being something that feels a little bit elitist and very tribal. It really, really wasn't that. And that was a real pleasant surprise to me.
Mm. I think... Stranger, because I wasn't there, but my wife's, one of her best friends at work randomly kind of contacted her on the day asking kind of if I'd gone to this thing, and she was kind of like, what are you talking about? And it was apparently because he had gone, because I think his girlfriend had something, or a friend of theirs had wanted to go, so he kind of tagged along. He doesn't play games. He was kind of dreading it because it's like he's not his scene. But he'd seen, apparently, I don't know if you guys can kind of elaborate on this, he'd seen people with staying in podcast stickers and stuff. So he had asked me about that. And I was like, well, we do have people there, but it's not me. But he'd said that kind of like he'd been dreading it, but he got there and he'd had a really great time because he's not like a big game and stuff like that. And it kind of goes into what you're talking about, how welcoming it is and how kind of laid back it is, that someone who perhaps who isn't like deep into the kind of the hobby went there kind of not looking forward to it because it's not their scene, not something that they would want to do, but ended up having a really great time just because obviously they got swept up in kind of the atmosphere that the whole place creates. And that kind of, we talk about kind of that pushback of kind of not feeling kind of like you really belong there. I mean, I had a sense of it a little bit at the UK Games Expo because it's just not, those places aren't my scenes. They're kind of, it's not really for me. And I do at times feel a little bit kind of out of place there. But it sounds like this is the kind of place that is really welcoming and really kind of draws people in. And regardless of what level of enjoyment or engagement you are with the hobby, there is a place for you to be able to embrace it and be able to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. The problem with the convention center is kind of you feel like you're locked in and committed to that experience. So it's like the amount of times at the UK Games Expo we're like, well, should we just wander around the shops again? Just like, because you do feel like really like, well, I'm here now, I might as well buy something or just wander around the shops. Whereas at AireCon, even if you feel like, oh, what should we do? You can wander around the shops, but it's easier to wander around and see people playing games where it's kind of like you don't feel like you can just do that naturally at the Games Expo. Anyway, so I guess we should speak about what we played a little bit, just in case there are some games that might take people's fancy. One of the first games I played was with our good friend Adamski. We played a game called Crash Octopus whilst we were waiting for Kris to get finished at the Bring and Buy sale, which is one of the most incredible things that I have ever experienced. And again, I think this is one of the things where AireCon really excels, is that Bring and Buy experience was incredible. So the night before we were going to AireCon, I turned to Kris and said, oh, I wonder if they're doing a Bring and Buy. Oh, they are. All right. So then me and Kris going to all the different board game hotspots in my house going, what can I sell? What can I sell? Yes. You get the little app, you fill it all in, and it's all BGG, Board Game Geek, linked up to, so you can just search for the game you want. It all pops up, you just press it in, fills all the details in for you. You just set a price, and then when you turn up, they scan it, put a barcode on, and it goes into the shop, and you forget about it. And so I sold some stuff whilst I was there, which is really easy and wonderful. But just walking around this one room that they had filled to the brim of board games that people had either donated because they were doing a fund for Ukraine, which is basically like a pay as you want, and people had donated incredible stuff, like some really like stuff that obviously people were getting rid of, but I swear I saw an original copy of Catan in there, like original.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, and it was bonkers. But just, that experience of discovery and looking at things that weren't in shrink wrap and were pre-loved, and you could tell had a kind of story about them. And as I said to Kris, I was like, you could really make someone's weekend like in a place like this, because it made my weekend that I just get like little notifications or just check the app every once in a while, see, oh, I've sold my copy of Carcassonne. Look, Kris, look, I've made money. And it's just like, this is brilliant. Like, I'm actually like profiting from this weekend. So I definitely bullied Kris into making some purchases at the Bring of Carcassonne.
But it's I bought the games off Sam. No, I picked up 2 games, Merchants and Marauders. That literally, as you say, Sam, the night before we left for Harrogate, I could see that he was there, and I thought, oh, I'm really going for a pirate thing at the moment. So I'm reading this great book called Under the Black Flag about the history of pirates in the Caribbean. It's an amazing book. I thought, oh, everyone says this is like the most thematic pirate game. And I went around the Bring and Buy sale. It says here that it's in stock, and I was browsing and couldn't find it. And it was like being in a library where the book's here. It says it in the catalogue, it's here, but where is the book? And I kind of resigned myself to the fact that maybe this isn't my time. And it was the last trip we took the Bring and Buy sale that you found it. And it was wonderful. Nobody else had grabbed it. Maybe some people had picked it up, carried it around, shall I? And they put it back somewhere else. So the games just move around the space. There was one card game that I wanted to grab. I didn't in the end, because when I went back, they had gone, but it was still on the catalogue. Where's it gone? So the Bring and Buy sale is just something that's constantly shifting and changing throughout. And I bought Merchants and Marauders, is the game I bought from 2010 from Christian Markusson and Casper Argard for art from Z-Man Games, which is a sandbox pirates game, essentially. And we're going to be playing this soon, Pete, where you decide, am I going to be a merchant? Am I going to be a marauder? And I just go, I'm going to go over there. There's a rumour there's treasure over there. I'm going to go over there. So that was a big box I had to carry around because I didn't have one of those nice backpacks that Sam got for his birthday. And the second one I bought, which is what we played at the con, which was Raptor by Bruno Catala and with art by Vincent Dutrait, which is a lovely two-player game where one of you is a raptor, a mummy raptor, and their baby raptors who has to eat scientists to win the game, and the other is the scientist who has to try and capture the baby raptors or tranquilise the mummy raptor. And that was a lovely little tug of war. And there's something really quite nice. Somebody walked in to Harrogate, into AireCon, with that copy of Raptor. They traded it in like Sam did. I went and bought it, and I went straight downstairs with my purchase. I opened it and started playing it. I mean, that game's gone such a beautiful little journey there. Isn't that really nice? And I've been able to introduce that, and it's new to me in a manner that it's old to them. And that's really, really lovely.
Yeah. I think there's a lot about the newness of this hobby, and getting things that are new. But it was quite nice at AireCon, and sometimes I felt a bit cheap for doing this. But if there was a game that I saw that I liked, the first thing I'd do is I'd check the Bring a Buy site, because you can basically just search it like a library and just see if it's in there, rather than just buying it brand new. So that was Bring a Buy. That was excellent. And then Kris and I kind of settled into some of the gaming for the afternoon. So Kris introduced Parade to me, which I really actually quite enjoyed, which is probably a game that tends to be quite complicated to explain, but actually isn't a complicated game. And we also met up with the wonderful people at Hachette, and we managed to get a sneak preview of a game called Sobek 2 Players, which is a game designed by one of the designers of Seven Wonders Duel and one of the designers of Jaipur.
Ooh.
It's a 2-player version of a game called Sobek, and they fortunately enough gave us a copy just before we left the show, actually. So I think we'll talk about that on a previous episode, because I've been playing it a bit with my wife, who didn't come to the con with us. But I think that warrants probably sort of in-depth discussion, because it's rather good. What else did we play with them? Oh, we played Ganymede by from Funny Fox, which is this really compelling strategy game where you've got to try and get people from Earth to Mars and then to Ganymede. And you do that by selecting cards which basically allow you to shift basically people from each kind of planet. But you have to be very, very strategic, like very, very strategic in terms of like the colours that the meeples are and the sort of the factions that the cards are, in order to get certain bonuses and allow you to do certain things, because the planets only can hold a certain number of meeples on them. So you've got to make sure that there's this constant like flow of people moving from planet to planet in order for you to actually get the process completed. And I think both me and Kris thought that we were going to be sitting down to this quite gentle, just like conveyor belt of a game, like shipping people from planet to planet, but it turned out to be this very, very heavy strategic game where you have to kind of think 2 or 3 moves ahead, which is not necessarily a bad thing, not at all. Like I think it's actually a really, really interesting game. But yeah, it wasn't quite what I was expecting. A bit of surprise Ganymede was.
We played Viscounts of the West Kingdom, which I'm going to talk about in a future episode, because the more I played that, the more I enjoy that game. And I enjoyed it the first time, but I'm enjoying it even more the more I play it. But I want to talk about a game, Sam, that for me was the MVP of the entire con. You introduced it to me. It was sent to us to review. Switch and Signal.
Yes, so this is a game about trains. And this was actually lovely for a lot of reasons, because not only was this the last thing we played on the Saturday night at 1 o'clock in the morning, but it was also one of the very few times someone else came up to us and went, "Oh my word, are you playing Switch and Signal?" And we were like, "Yes, we are playing Switch and Signal." And they were like, "We've literally just started." And they were like, "Oh my word, I've heard so much about this game." And I'm like, "Yeah, and we're playing it."
Nice.
Yeah. So this is a sort of a re-implementation, a reissue, I guess, of Switch and Signal, which was released back in 2014, I want to say. The same designers involved, David Thompson, who we all know and love because he's part of the team that brought us Undaunted Normandy and Undaunted North Africa. So, you know, a designer of pedigree. I think he also worked on that Sniper Elite, the board game, as well. And yeah, so this was sent to us from Kosmos. So this is a cooperative game about trains. And the premise is very, very simple. You have two maps, either Europe or North America. And you essentially, all you've got to do is you've got to get goods from one city to another city. That's all you have to do. And on the board, you have switches and you have signals. And in order to get goods from one area to another, you've got to make sure that those switches are switched in the way that let you travel through the routes. And you've got to make sure the signals are on green so you can travel to the cities. And you do all that by basically playing cards. So a card will allow you to switch a switch, which are these two black little tokens that allow you to manipulate different routes on the board. So you can decide, well, we need to get this train from Marseille through to Amsterdam. So if we switch this switch, when it encounters it, the train will bop right and back up to Amsterdam rather than just falling straight down into the middle of France. And then you'll play a card to switch a signal from red to green, which essentially allows the train to move through that track. So if it's a red signal, the train will just stop there. Or if it encounters a red signal on the edge of a city, it won't go into the city. It will just stop on the edge until that signal turns green. And then the other card you play is just to move trains, and trains move just by a roll of a dice. Grey ones move quite slowly, so the dice only move between 1 to 3. Black trains run the fastest, so dice move between like about 3 up to 6, I think, or maybe 3 to 5. So you've got these like bombastic black trains that just like bulldoze like through countries and like deliver your goods in a heartbeat. But then you've got the other grey trains, which are a bit more slow, sedate, and take their time. And you might be thinking, why is that important? Why is there a differentiator between the trains? And that's because you're against the clock delivering these goods. So on the Europe side, you're delivering goods from like Berlin and Amsterdam, and you've got to get them all the way down to Marseille, I want to say, Kris?
Yes, in the south.
On the south coast. And so, but you're against the clock. You basically got a deck of cards, which is like your clock. So at the start of every term, you turn over one of these decks of cards, and it allows you to do certain things like put new trains on the board or move trains that are already in action. If at any point when you're moving a train or putting a train down, you can't fully complete that action, you essentially will lose these time tokens that are on the board. Lose all the time tokens, and then you lose a card from the deck, which is the timer. So essentially you've got to get things done quicker than you usually would have done. So if a train moves and its route and its movement is blocked by a red signal or a switch it can't get past, to complete that movement, you get a penalty. Take off some time tokens. If a train encounters another train on a track while it's completing the movement, take some time off, remove some time tokens. If the train doesn't stop in a city by the end of its movement to pick up a good, it won't pick up a good. So you've basically throughout the whole game, you're sitting with your partner or your friends or your family, working out this wonderfully simple but elegant logistic puzzle where you're basically running a train delivery company, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and you've got the little cubes go in the back of it as well. You can slot the little cubes in there.
You put the little cubes on the back of the train as they're delivering it, and and you're there like having serious conversations. Like, right, we've got 2 trains currently outside Amsterdam, right? I think, right, this train is 3 steps away, but it's a black one, which means it's probably going to overshoot. So if it does overshoot Amsterdam, let's switch these signals. So essentially it does a loop back round So we might. So we'll get it on a future turn. So let's move. Yeah, let's move the grey train because it's a bit slower and steadier. It's more likely to actually land in its location in Amsterdam. Meanwhile, another train's appeared on the board, and we've got to make sure that there's signals switched between there. So we want we want that train to get to Marseille. So we've got to make sure that the signals are switched in a way that it will bend its route towards that location. And at a time of the night where we were flagging, we'd been up until 1 o'clock in the morning the previous night watching Batman. We'd been walking around a convention centre, having driven there from 9 o'clock in the morning. It was now 1 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning, and I never expected to feel as exhilarated or as giddy as I did playing a game as we did, Kris, playing Switch and Signal. We were speaking about it and gabbing on about it all the way back to the hotel that night, which is bonkers.
And then we woke up the next day, very light and breezy. We played Sagradia, didn't we? Dice
for the first
game,
time. Which is the great thing about conventions is those games that you've been like, I've always wanted to play that. I wonder if that's any good. And usually you just be like, well, it's 30 quid, I'll just buy it, and then you play it once and go,
no.
Yeah, well, that was fun, but my collection used to be full of games like that. Those kind of one and dones. Oh, we learned something nice today, didn't we? But yeah, Sagrada was one of those games that I had always wanted to play, but never got around to it, and absolutely really enjoyed that. Actually, really interesting puzzle. I think I'm definitely going to get the app for my phone because I think it will make a really interesting little one player. Actually, Galaxy Trucker was another one. We rented that from the library, didn't we, Kris? I've always wanted to give Galaxy Trucker a go.
And again, we unboxed it, we started playing it, and somebody walked over and said, "Oh, have you played this before?" I'm like, "Oh, no, we haven't." And said, "Oh, do you want me to teach you the rules?" They taught us the rules, and then they just walked off. They didn't work there.
It was fantastic.
They just loved the fact that they were there. It's like when you've got your favourite film, you think, I want to just watch somebody else watch this because I found somebody who's not seen this film before. I get that experience of seeing somebody react to it. And they had that teaching us Galaxy Trucker. I was the one that taught them Galaxy Trucker.
Yeah, and like little tidbits, and like the way you teach someone something, and they were obviously getting carried away by about how exciting like they found the game, and like they were like, "Oh, you're gonna love this, and then you can do this, and then you know once you've learned how to do that, then this happens." And it was just that kind of thing is infectious. You can only get that at convention centers. Like it's really really special. We played Scorer as well, which was another game that was being demoed on the floor, which is a really enjoyable sort of stickle twist sort of Viking game about fish. And I learned a lesson, which was not to take 17 games with me in a big board game rucksack, because you're never going to play them all. Everything about it was really fun. And, I came home and I spoke about it, and the first thing that my wife said was like, "I'd love to go to that next year."
Really?
And she was looking at the photos and going, "Oh, it doesn't look like what I expected. Like, I'd love to go to that." Whereas I think if she'd looked at like photos from the Board Games Expo, I think that would have been exactly what she'd expected, and been a bit like, nah, it doesn't really look like my thing.
It feels like generally there are three kinds of conventions, and I actually I mean that AireCon sounds absolutely fantastic. It sounds absolutely amazing. Sounds brilliant. There's that kind of like not intimate, but like friendly. You're there to play games. You're there to do that kind of thing, like smaller, but not necessarily small, like mid-sized. Established, you know what you're going to get, but it's a nice friendly environment, like it. Then you got your like UK Games Expos, which are your big bangers. You're like, oh, people do huge announcements at these things, and like it is, like tens of thousands of people and stuff like that. And you've got your low end stuff that I like as well, the really small ones like
Wellington Con.
Yeah, Wellington Con. Just me sitting in my pants in my house.
Okay, I've gone on. I've put this online on the Guardian.
Oh great!
There is a section called semantic enigmas. Somebody's put. This is Han from Norwich. Do you eat or drink soup? It is now the cause of much debate around the office and where Han works.
Somewhere fun. You know what, Kris? Somewhere fun. All right.
For a week, Pete's been on this.
Seth from Edinburgh says, definitely eat. We don't seem to have this problem with other liquid foodstuffs, No one suggests that we drink gravy or ketchup or baked beans in sauce, so why soup?
Well done.
Yeah. And then Jill, interesting angle, we've not explored this one. Surely it depends if you're using a spoon or not.
I did say that as part of my delineations, part of my categories, what it's ate with. There you go.
Kevin just says, usually I spill it. Ha ha.
Oh, that
Usually. Don't give him soup.
That was another episode of Staying In with Sam Turner, Dan Frost, Peter Willington-Conn, and myself, Kris Darby. I really loved that episode. Any excuse to talk about the Batman, I will be there. Definitely. And I thought, given the fact that I've got the mic right now and I'm editing this podcast, I thought it'd be, as a public service, I would just throw some recommendations to you, listener, of good Batman graphic novels to read that I think would really, really appeal. That for me, capture the detective Batman that interests me. Some of them you may have read, others you may have heard of, but these are recommendations. The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, really, really good. There are lots of kind of notes of that in the Batman. Batman the Black Mirror by Scott Snyder, with art by Jock and Francesco Francavilla. The second artist there was influential to Matt Reeves in particular in terms of the look and feel of the Batman. There's the classic Batman Year One by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. And then one that you don't often get talked about, but I really like it, even though it has a kind of a supernatural lean to it, is Batman Gotham County Line by Steve Niles, with art by Scott Hampton. It's really about Batman solving a homicide that's in the suburbs of Gotham. It's really an area of Gotham that you don't really go to. So those are my recommendations, and hopefully you enjoy them. And if you've tried them, or if there's a particular Batman that you like or want to recommend, get in touch with us. stayinginpodcast@gmail.com is how you can email us. @stayinginpod is a handle for all manner of social media platforms. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the like really there. So do get in touch, because genuinely, like, I'm really hungry for Batman at the moment. So I'd really appreciate any recommendations there. Likewise, also, we have our Board Game Geek page, where all the myriad of games that Sam and I played at AireCon and what we've spoken about on this podcast will be there within that page as well. So you can kind of look at them yourself and say, oh, is that one right for me? Actually, does that Switch and Signal game sound good? Or is it just the fact Sam and Kris really enjoyed it because they were really quite drunk at the time and delirious from all the fatigue? I personally think it's an amazing game, and one you should definitely look at. Also, I know we didn't talk about any today, but we do talk about video games in other episodes of the podcast. So we have our Steam curation page, which also captures and documents those. And I think that's pretty much it, I think, for the time being. Quite a bumper episode there. And without further ado, I will see you in 2 weeks. Have a good one and take care. Bye.
Shall we do the spoilies?
Ooh, that's quite
Let's
creepy.
treat ourselves to a bit of a spoil.
All right.
Right.
So it's clearly it's a movie that's got problems. It is 3 hours long. I needed a wee about an hour and a half in. Actually, I needed a wee as soon as it started, and then I didn't go, and I drank a pint while I was watching it, which was really bad. So I missed about 2 minutes. But I will also say this:
2 minutes. Sorry, hang on. 2 minutes. Considering that 20 seconds of those minutes should be washing your hands if you're doing properly, then let's say another 20 seconds as drying hands.
Oh yeah,
Let's
all right,
say
okay.
another
Well, maybe
20
like 5 minutes.
No, because you don't have to. When you leave the bathroom, your hands don't have to be bone dry. You can be wiping them on your trousers as you walk as well.
But either way, when I'd finished weeing, I know this is a bit grim. I'd built up so much urine in my bladder that after I'd finished weeing, I literally staggered. I was like exhausted from the wee. Anyway, so that was 3 hours long, and I will say that there are moments where it's almost like it's trying to be clever, but it comes across as dumb. Like there's the bit where you see the penguin waddle is the stupidest part of that movie. I hate it. I quite like that. I hated that bit. I was just like and now I'm taken out of the movie. However, every single bit of it, from like the use of like there's very rarely a bright moment, right? It's dark all the time. The stylish, like how stylish every single part of the architecture is. Every single bit of it, just kind of stylistically, the whole thing just really works for me. But the major thing that I get from it is completely encapsulated in the opening moments and in the closing moments, like you say, Sam. Like
that could have been the trailer.
It could have been the trailer, but the interesting thing about it is in the opening moments when you are seeing through Batman's eyes what it is that he's.
No, you're not.
Sorry, when it implies you are seeing through Batman's eyes.
Are you?
I think it implies that.
It's Riddler, isn't it? I don't. What? I don't. Hang on. No, when you're saying you're seeing through someone's eyes, you're seeing what the Riddler is seeing. So you're seeing through their eyes.
When I saw that opening scene, I thought I was seeing through the eyes of Batman, the person who we historically have always seen at the top of buildings looking over onto Gotham, right? And observing something going on, right? Observing a scene. And it's always struck me in the Batman canon that it's a thing he does so much. And we very rarely get these moments where we actually see this. But when you really think about who the Batman is, he is an absolute creep. Like, it's really weird. Batman is a really strange character. And Bruce Wayne and Batman, like, I know some people want to kind of divorce those two entirely and be like, oh, this person's really this person. And is the disguise really when he's not wearing the cape? No. It's actually just he's a nut job. And like when in that first scene, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm seeing through the eyes of Batman at this point. Of course, it's revealed later that it's not. But it made me think, this is what he would see, though. This is how he would be acting. He's got a cowl. He'd hear his own breathing, and then towards the end of the movie, where he confronts the Riddler in. Is it Arkham that he's actually in, or does he go to Blackgate?
Yeah,
it is Arkham, isn't it? When he confronts the Riddler in Arkham, and you realise that the Riddler thought they were on the same side, thought that they were kindred spirits the entire time, took inspiration from the Batman, like, and when Bruce starts to realise this. To realise how much he knows about who the Batman is, although obviously and obviously that final bit of like where he doesn't quite realise who Batman's secret identity actually is, but when you realise that he kind of the Riddler seems to really understand, because he's a smart guy, you know, he seems to really understand what makes Bruce Wayne tick, what makes the Batman, and actually thinks that they're basically the same thing. You realise as a viewer, you're like, yes, both of you should be locked in there. Batman should not be questioning this person. Like, they should both just be locked away because they are basically doing the same thing. And it's incredible. Like, it also manages to make that character of the Riddler a character who I think at times can feel really silly and pastiche. You look at something like Batman Forever or something along those lines, and he just seems really...
Oh, no, careful.
Well, no, I like it, but it is a character that portrayal of that character is a very specific, campy, you know...
Well, I don't know if there's Frank Gorshin in the 60s series who was of a similar ilk to Jim Carrey.
Yeah, I suppose so. But like, I think the point I'm trying to make is that the Riddler can be played up for laughs, right? Can be absolutely played up as kind of very silly and, you know, that kind of thing. But actually manages to make the Riddler a character that at times, like, you as a viewer again are like, yeah, you were doing the right thing. Sure, your methods were absolutely abhorrent and you shouldn't do it like that. But right at the heart, what is the difference between the way that you do it and the way that Batman does it?
I think, you know, that is kind of what I enjoyed most about the film overall is, again, I sided with Kris that the fact it was we were seeing Detective Batman for the first time, but he's a pretty bad detective. Like, he can look at a scene and work things out fair enough and put two and two together, and he's very analytical, but he's absolutely terrible when it comes to like seeing the bigger picture. Like there's this whole thing, like all this corruption going on and all this gangster stuff and all these like high level crime dealings. No idea it was happening. 2 years,
Yeah.
no idea that any of this was happening until the Riddler puts it on a plate and says, did you know all this stuff, all these people are like, and even then, even when it's all put under his face and the Riddler is showing him what Gotham is actually like, he still doesn't follow the direct path and goes on these wild goose chases so much that actually, and this is where the film starts to fall down in my eyes, the Riddler gets away with it. The Riddler's plan happens. Like the Batman doesn't solve it. He doesn't do anything. The Batman. He doesn't. He's really ineffective as a detective. Like he's really good detective, but he's really ineffective. And at no point does anyone ever call out the Batman for the fact that because of his methods and because of he was so obsessed by going after this one person, he was so obsessed by saying, well, this must be the person I'm definitely going after, that thousands of people died. And it's at that point where I was like, surely the cops shouldn't really be trusting this person now, because the Batman is now practically, they followed him and took his lead, and now all these people are now in peril in Gotham, and the Riddler's plan has actually come together. But then the film portrays Riddler as someone who thinks that he's failed, but all of his bombs are like, at this point it was starting to twist itself in some sort of logical, like tonal knots. But overall, that impression of Batman, and if they do a sequel, I hope they actually start to address how ineffective and that he should actually be called into question for his methods. But yeah, but that's like the two sides of main coin. The things that it did really well, but the real thing that it missed.
Yeah, I think that whole middle kind of act was really, like, I came out of it thinking, like, you could just lose that entire subplot, because I'm sitting there, like, the reference I saw immediately, and it's obviously everyone has seen it, is Seven, like the influence of a film like Seven on this, and I think that's a phenomenal film. And I'm watching it, and I'm in it, and I'm wondering which direction it's going to go. And then, as you mentioned kind of earlier in the episode, Sam, it kind of forgets about that, and it's going on a real good pace, and it kind of forgets that to go on this subplot. And then when it comes to the bit where Carmine Falcone gets shot and Riddler's there, you go, oh, of course, yeah, you're back now. And then it immediately kind of picks up again. So I mean, there's the scene in the interrogation scene that for me that was akin to Joker Batman from The Dark Knight, which is probably one of the high points of that entire series. And it was reminiscent of that, which is kind of a huge compliment. That it was just fantastic, and it was just kind of electric and just brilliantly played by both people. And kind of, I think Paul Dano is brilliant in it with the amount of kind of screen time that's not behind a mask. He does phenomenally well. The only issues I had with it is Batman is one thing that's good about Batman, and I have to say I come at this probably in a very different place to all of you, because I don't read the comics. I don't read the. I've read Killing Joke and I've read Nightfall. They're the only ones I've read, and so I don't have kind of, Kris, you're talking about you love the detective side. Pete, you love kind of the psychopath side. I don't have like a version of Batman that I like. I know the films. That's my entry point. And the bit I was talking about earlier that I was kind of missing was my favourite thing in the Christopher Nolan films is learning how he has all this tech, how he is this great fighter, how he does all this stuff, because he is originally just a rich kid. So why is he suddenly this kind of martial arts person and can fly around and has the Batmobile and all that stuff, and it explains it, and I really like that. And obviously the Batman doesn't want to do any of that. He just wants to give you this version kind of formed like a year or 2 years into it. You have the moment where the Batmobile appears, which is like, yes, that's what I wanted to see.
It's incredible.
But I didn't know why he was such a good fighter. And obviously he's not like he's a martial artist. He is just fighting with anger. It's just violence. But he's still able to take down a group of 7 or 8 guys who can all fight. I don't understand it. It's something I've never really seen because I only watch the films. I've never understood the world's greatest detective thing, because like I've never seen any evidence of, oh, this is why he's the world's greatest detective. Like with Batman Begins, he trains with this this kind of cult in Tibet or wherever it is, and that's why he can fight the way he does. But there's never been a thing where, we've shown something where he's learned, he's studied, he has this analytical mind. It's just there. And so when he's just walking around a crime scene and he's just kind of being allowed to do that, I do struggle to like, well, what is it that makes you such a great detective? Why are you like this? And again, that's kind of why I want to see further films. So I want to see that bit more rounded. I want to have a bit more information behind that, because that's what I like to see. So those were the kind of bits that kind of were I was really looking for, and I got it with the Batmobile because for one, the Batmobile, it's a modified car. I'm like, fine, I'm on board with that. That can be done by someone who doesn't have kind of like Lucius Fox to build it for them. You could do that yourself theoretically. The only other thing that I think I've said that 3 times now, but there is only one other thing that kind of pulled me out a little bit, because it is so gritty and grimy and grungy, and you really feel the dirt under your fingernails with this whole world. But there's a couple of moments where it wrenches you out of that. And when I talk about Batman, he is just a man. He has trained and he's done this, but he is just a man behind a mask. There's no superpowers. He's not got super blood. He's not got a suit or anything like that. He's just a man. And so the scene where I forget the character, the one of the guys who the Riddler's attached a bomb to his neck, and the bomb goes off in Batman's face, like inches away, and it throws him back, but he's not injured at all. And there's no effect, there's no scar, and there's no like literally he gets up after that, pretty shortly afterwards, and immediately I was kind of like, oh, so that's kind of, so he's not just a man. And similarly, I think when he jumps off the roof with the wingsuit, and then sets off his parachute and slams into a wall, like proper slams, like that would kill a person. But he gets up immediately. He limps, but he gets up immediately. And it's those kind of bits I'm like, oh, you've pulled me out of it, because I've lost that grind, that grittiness that was holding me in this world that was so absorbing.
See, I'm not too worried about that, because there's also bits where he's shot at point blank range and the bullets ping off of his armor. Like it is set up the idea that like he has incredible levels of protection and stuff like that, and yet at the same time there's moments where you see the literal scars as a metaphor for the emotional scars that he suffers by fighting crime day in, day out. Like there's huge sequences where it's just like, yeah, he's got this armor, but look at his back, it's absolutely messed up, it looks like a dog's breakfast, at the same time as him sort of looking absolutely exhausted, and just like a ghost of a man. So I'm not too worried about that side of things.
Which I agree with all those things, because that shows you he's just a man.
Yeah.
So when those couple of things happen that kind of jar against that, I mean, the big one was the one where the explosion in his face, and obviously that's a completely uncovered space. Yeah. That's the fire's there, but there's no redness even. Kind of and that's what I was just kind of like, and it throws him across the room, and it goes off. It's like if he had turned and tried to jump out the way, then you know what, suspension of disbelief, I'll get on board. But it goes off in his face, but there's no kind of result of that, and that was kind of it's a stupid thing to get hung up on, but it broke the magic for me, and it took me a while to then fall back into it.
It's really interesting you say that, because like I've listened to interviews with Matt Reeves, and he goes on about like one of his most popular descriptors is subjectivity, and I don't know in what context he's referring to it as, but he was very, very keen that like we're following Batman throughout. There's not really much where we cut away from Batman, and to all intents and purposes, we're seeing this world not just in a POV through his eyes, but we're given to view that this is how he perceives the world. And I quite like this fact that he can almost see in the dark. And that's where you get, he wears sunglasses during the day. There is something vampiric about him. And Reeves wanted to view him almost like some kind of like lead rock singer recluse who just... who's just shies away from society, eschews any kind of sense of publicity or anything like that. And yeah, he's on the crime scene. What I really loved as a detective, he's not there going, "Oh, have you looked over there? Have you done this?" He's like, The thumb was severed while he was alive. Sorry, can you say it again? His thumb was severed while he was alive. And it's like that he knows the stuff, but he doesn't know how to communicate. He has no understanding of how to socialise at all with any other person. There's none of that bravado that kind of Christian Bale's Batman just gets straight away. And he's like really husky. He goes, yeah, nice coat. And then he just like, almost instantaneously comes back to Gotham. He's like, yeah, I've got the suit. I can do this. I'll do this for a bit of cave diving. Perfect. Boom, 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 boom. And I think it's really, really interesting. He's really not comfortable in the role. Some people have complained online that he walks too slowly. I think, yeah, I mean, but like...
Those boots are really heavy.
Those entrances, the sound of the water, the sound of just those steps in the dark. I've seen loads of Batman films where you see the criminals getting unnerved by him. This is one of the very first where I'm unnerved by him. Thinking, you need help, mate. You really do. There was one moment where I heard Sam make a sound that I've not heard since John Wick Parabellum. It was a and it was that moment, and I do it as well, where you are watching something that is both really cool and really ridiculous simultaneously. And it was the entrance of the Batmobile, because it is ridiculous. And when you realise that actually he's not using it as necessarily an outlet to compensate for something, it's just purely fear. That thing just growls in the dark. And that sequence, like you're watching the Penguin and the Batmobile, and it cuts between the two. They're staring each other down. You think, this is ridiculous. It's a car. It's metal and petrol. But there is something bestial about it. And I think that's where Reeves gets it right, because that power of subjectivity, we're seeing it as how the criminals see him. We're not an outsider who's just there on the fringes. We're seeing it from them. There's a reason why the camera hugs so close to the cars as you're watching that kind of incredible kind of chase sequence erupt. This is how they see him, and this is how he sees the world. And it's a world that's metaphoric, not metonymic. It's not about going, okay, this is exactly how it should be. This is in the Nolan verse kind of way, which I love. And again, that I'm not trying to besmirch one thing to elevate another, not at all. But it's just a very different take. This is a metaphoric Gotham, which has these flights of fancy. And I don't even think some of that stuff happened as it actually happened. I think it's just how Batman saw it and experienced it. And it's just how he's written it in his notes. That's how he's remembered it in his journal. I think that's what we're seeing to some degree. This is how he thinks it happened, but he can't be sure, which is why he has to commit it to paper. And the writing is this awful kind of scrawl.
Well, it looks like the Riddler's writing. Like it's bonkers. Like the constant duality between those two characters is just always explored. I think the only character that I really just thought, like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you even bothering having this character here? Was Alfred. Because there is no reason. That actor is totally wasted in that role. Like, it's just like, he's a character actor ultimately who is playing almost no character. Like, he's given almost nothing to work with, and I almost feel like the movie wastes time not really exploring the relationship, and therefore there is no payoff at the end. Like, there are moments of like visual moments of sort of touching, a sort of touching element whereby Bruce holds on to Alfred's hand, and that's the actual like cinematography of it is very beautiful and really delicately put together and is really wonderful to see on a big screen. But like, I just felt nothing. I felt nothing about those characters. I was just like, well, he just seems like an ineffective guardian. Like, it's just like,
very ineffective. And I mean, the fact that he references that he previously worked for the British Secret Service, and he's opening unmarked mail that arrives to bloody Bruce Wayne in the bloody office is just like, and for me, Alfred is the most important character in the whole, in like everyone shares who they think Batman is, or what Batman they'd like to see. My favorite Batman is a Batman as a father and as a son, and I thought that they go through great lengths at the start of the Batman to set this film up as a story between a father and a son, being Alfred and Bruce. And, the fact that you can't control and you can't look after your children all the time, and you can't always be there for them, and you always try to show them the right way, but it's impossible. And you've got one character, Alfred, who's a father who's coming up to deal with that, and then you've got one character, which is Bruce, which is a son who's learning to what actually matters most in his life and who has the most impact on his life. But then that's just forgotten. And then it comes back to what you were saying, Pete. It comes back to that moment in the hospital when Alfred does the dumb thing and opens up the package. And then it's kind of like, oh yeah, now I know what really matters to me because you nearly died. Anyway, onto this other thing, which also, and I know there's a reason for this, the Riddler, right? Massive, knows everything about everyone, stalks everyone, watches everyone constantly, 24/7, knows where everyone is, knows how to get them, knows their secrets, knows their vices. Nothing ever goes wrong, but yet he can't find or track Bruce Wayne. Has to send a message to his house. And I know, Chris, you're like, well, it's because he never knows who Bruce Wayne is. I still think it falls down on a logic point that, like, yeah, but he's the Riddler and he's obsessive. Like, he is that smart and that intelligent. There was never really, it would have been nice to see, like, his frustration at trying to find Bruce Wayne and try to actually, but I don't know whether that's something they're going to explore in the comics. So Paul Dano's written a Riddler comic, which is coming out later this year, I think. But
yeah, Riddler year one.
It's, I think that's my main issue with the film overall, is that length gives me time to start to nitpick. And I think if it just dropped the Falcone section, like, that would make a great sequel. Like Batman actually tackling organised crime and going after Falcone and learning who Selina Kyle is, and the rise of the Penguin, all in the midst of while Gotham is trying to rebuild itself from this massive tragic event. I think that would make a really interesting sequel. But for some reason, it's kind of like, we don't know if we're getting a sequel, so let's put it in this film. But that's what I mean. Like, that just gave me time to start nitpick and go, hang on, but how has he got that package to there? And why doesn't he do that? And actually, he's not a very great detective, is he? And who is the Riddler again? And, I think I definitely would have enjoyed it more if it was just shorter.
5 minutes shorter than Endgame.
Mm-hmm.
And so just put that into perspective, it is 20 minutes longer than The Dark Knight. And it's strange because The Dark Knight felt longer to me in a weird way.
Yeah, but that's because of the ferry scene.
Yeah, and it's 10 minutes longer than The Dark Knight Rises, which again, I thought The Dark Knight Rises was longer. It felt longer.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's all about what 10 minutes feels like for you.
But it's just like, I have the same problem with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Like,
which I've not seen.
When I'm thinking... Pardon?
FYI, I've not seen.
Okay. I'm just speaking about length in general. It's just like, I know that the Batman is a 15, so it's kind of a moot point, which is another thing it gets absurdly right, because I feel it's very difficult to make a good Batman film. It can be done, but tonally and structurally, I think it helps that we can have a bit of violence. I just think, like, if you're introducing these films to someone who's a lot younger, like, you're asking so much of that person to go, like, I just think, like, where are the pithy 90-minute films that I watched when I was a kid? And I mean, this is beginning to sound like, well, back in my day. But it's just like, those pithy, 90-minute Batman films that I watched.
But I got to say, like, Sam, like, that does feel like that feels like a critique, a totally valid critique, but it feels like a critique of filmmaking in general rather than...
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Rather than, like, this film in particular.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely a critique of the fact that I think, unless it really warrants it, like the story really warrants it. So, for example, Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and Return of the King, which, being from literary forms, I don't feel like there's a good way that you could tell that story in less time. I feel like there's no real reason why any film needs to justify being over 90 minutes in length. I don't feel like the form suits anything longer, more than that.
I would say 2 hours. I think anything over 2 hours feels excessive.
I can't really put a number on it. I just can't, because as long as I know what it is before I go in, because as a child I remember switching on Ben-Hur, oh, this looks quite cool, and it was 4 hours long. As long as I knew in advance, like when I went to see it a second time with you, Sam, I mean, I think I just ate raw rice so I wouldn't have to go to the toilet or something like that. You know, I didn't drink as much drink or anything beforehand. But should I do that? You know, is that a strange thing to do before watching a film? It didn't feel long for me necessarily, this, apart from first time round when I thought it ended and it hadn't. There was another whole act for me to watch. And that's why I think I enjoyed it a little bit more a second time round with you, Sam, because I knew where it was going, and there were certain little Easter eggs, little nuggets I saw that knitted it together. But it felt almost like that last act was the studio going in, okay, it's a superhero film, we've not had any massive explosions, and okay, we'll allow you, director, not to have a fist fight between the main villain and the hero, but you need to have some kind of sense of large destruction so it feels like a blockbuster, even though I know it's March. So that felt to me a bit of a bad aftertaste. And also, we've not talked about it, you were talking about the Penguins waddle taking you out of the film, Pete. For me, it was a wonderful actor, but I didn't need to see it in this film, was the Joker.
No, didn't need to see it at the end.
Didn't
just
see
needed
it at
the
all.
laugh.
That for me was the biggest mistake. I didn't even need a laugh. I didn't even need to know it existed.
Yeah,
I didn't care.
Actually, that's true.
There are so many of those rogues gallery that are just as interesting, but yet we keep perpetuating this. You know, Batman Begins did it as a tease at the end of its film. I really like that. It was just a little thing at the end of Playing Card. Didn't need it here, and it's a shame. If this was just going to be one film, fair enough. But the fact that they're going to make a trilogy out of this, like, what's the rush? Do you know what I mean? We're not Marvel. You know, Marvel does that thing, and they've got this grand plan. DC just lays the track as it's going, generally speaking. And the reason why I think this film is as good as it is because we've had a pandemic to some degree, which has meant that actually for the very first time in a DC film, they've had a chance to pause for thought mid-production and to really kind of hone some things that they wouldn't have had the luxury of to do in the past.